Could you talk about what Stanley originally found attractive about this novel and what drew him to it?
Yes, it was a very serious novel, and we already were very frightened. I think people have forgotten how frightening the Cuban Missile Crisis was. And Stanley was a bit of a forerunner to Google in research. He really wanted to know everything and scared himself to death and became more and more paranoid. He just really said, it's ridiculous. Why aren't we running away? You know, Australia, maybe? And there was already voices going on about Australia being a good place, the only place left. And say, okay, they speak English, I could make films there, and maybe we should. We're like the Jews in Germany. Why didn't they run? But we should go. You know, if they were standing there saying they can't kill us all, well, let's. So then the Cuban crisis got a bit better, and he didn't want to share a bathroom on the ship, which was already so we stayed. I was very relieved.
So one of the first drafts that he came up with was Delicate Balance of Terror, which we have an image of a cover here. And that was just with the author of Red Alert, Peter George, wasn't it?
Yes, Peter George.
And Richard, this was pretty much a very straightforward, serious script.
A serious, yeah, really kind of a dramatic translation of the original novel, which was suggested to Stanley by somebody called Alistair Buchan, the head of strategic studies.
Yes, well, Stanley met Herman Kahn, and he filled him in, and we would go to dinner with him. He was a very strange person, speaking 100 times faster than other people and weighing unbelievable amount of weight and ordering 3 dinners. And it was eerie, and everything he said was so logical. He invented that little disc where you could find out where you would want to be if the bomb hit. You could choose between vomiting yourself to death over a year or dying right away. I think that was the choice.
Just a reminder, this is the London Comedy Film Festival. And this is a photo of the novelist, Peter George, who's quite a tragic figure. He never really got over his sense of pessimism about the impending nuclear attack and actually committed suicide in 1966. Not before, actually, from what I gather, he wasn't happy at first with the comedy element of a satire being brought into it, but then I think he changed his mind.
No, he was very, very sad and used up and a raving alcoholic, and amazingly intelligent and sad. And I don't think he committed suicide. I think he just died.
Okay.
Yeah, he died. And Terry Southern was then writing The Magic Christian, a famous book, and Stanley thought it was hilarious and immediately got in touch with him, because every time he got more information, he was just, laughing, sick with fear. It all was so real, and Herman Kahn sort of underlined everything. Yes, it's true. It's amazing we're still around. And so Terry Southern arrived, and from then on, every new fact that came into the script made them think of new jokes, because it was just really horrendous.
And so as a result of his collaboration, then that really began to transform the whole project.
Yes.
It's one of the interesting things that I think when myths are built up around artists, one of the most popular and cliched is the idea of the Prospero artist, someone who lives alone on an island, at least artistically.
Uh-huh.
And this couldn't be any further from the truth when it came to Stanley Kubrick's work, because he was an incredible collaborator.
Oh yes, he loved working with people and felt it very necessary, and he was a great talker and intensely social. It's the opposite of what they said about him. No, I was the best entertained woman in the world.
And Jan, you not only being close to Stanley Kubrick, you were working as a producer on his films from Barry Lyndon onwards. Can you talk a little bit about the way that Stanley would work on a film and the collaborative process as one of the collaborators?
Yes, he struggled all the time. Nothing fell into his lap. He was striving, and I think this is the mark of a great artist, not to be easily satisfied with himself. And people called him a genius. And he said, well, if they just knew how difficult it was to be one, you know. And I mean, Dr. Strangelove, it was before my time. You know, I was in New York when the premiere was, but I didn't work with him. I had my previous profession, but I remember very, very well later on how he constantly stopped and listened and asked himself what's wrong with it. And this was the case in Dr. Strangelove. He felt to make it just a serious film would probably end up being mediocre. And if he feared anything in his life, it was mediocrity. That was a potential threat. And I'm so delighted that none of his films disappeared. And I think that's the mark of an artist.
We were discussing earlier, some of you might know a book that came out last year by the American journalist Eric Schlosser called Command and Control, which is a 50-year history of America's nuclear campaign, let's call it. And what's astonishing about it is that it is the documentary version of this film. Everything that you see in this film actually did happen. In 1980, a silo almost blew up because of one person's mistake. They dropped a wrench on top of a nuclear weapon, and the actual explosives exploded, but the plutonium wasn't affected. But it's quite amazing that in so many instances in Stanley's work, he was way ahead of his time.
Yes, it's very clear that there wasn't enough secrecy about, for instance, he should not have been able to copy the dashboard of a plane, but it was accessible. And one hears more and more rumors about it's almost impossible to keep something a secret that has to be instantly available if it's to work at all.
One of the rumors I hope is true, I'm not sure, when Ronald Reagan became president, and he arrived at the Pentagon, apparently he wanted to be taken to the war room because he actually believed that there was a war room, having seen this film. So I always like to think that's true.
I don't think it can be. I mean, I still have hope.
It's written in books. That must be true.
It must be true. Let's move on to the development of a script now. Richard, yes, could you talk about this version?
Well, what we've got here is a piece from an early script, which we think Peter George was working on, and it was when they decided, Kubrick said to one of the journalists on the New York Times after Strangelove had come out that what he was trying to do, whilst trying to make the serious version of the film, when he was trying to add flesh to the bones, he said, he felt like he was throwing out so much stuff because it was ludicrous, that in the end, the only natural way to make this film was to turn it into a comedy. And now the initial attempt at a comedy wasn't the comedy that we saw today, but actually a story of, he was also describing it, starring Peter Sellers, of a college professor who becomes incredibly famous, and in one of the script versions actually becomes the president through his knowledge of nuclear weapons. And so this is just part of a very front page, and it's a list of female characters. And what's really interesting in this is obviously in the finished film, there is only one female character, and she's only in it for a few seconds. She happens to be in quite a lot of the publicity materials, though.
Tracy Reed.
Tracy Reed, that's right, yeah. He knows how to sell a film as well as how to make one, I think is the clue there.
Did you discuss a lot with Stanley Christiane about the development of moving more into satire? And also...
I think he talked about where they were cracking up reading through the facts, and it was very much gallows humor. You only have to know your own face when you watch the news. It's ridiculous. Today, it's more so, even if that's possible. And I think it makes you laugh in a horrible way, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's a ludicrous notion, the idea that two parts of the world arm themselves with arms to be able to destroy the whole of the world, and that creates safety. It's nonsense.
And so by extension, one of the ideas that then came out of that was that aliens would actually, again, this is another development, would be looking down.
Yeah, so the opening titles, I don't know if you remember this one, but the opening titles are some kind of alien creature roaring as if it was the MGM lion. This is the kind of roll titles here. A weird hydra-headed furry creature snarls at the camera. And then the roll-up title comes up, Nardak Blefuscu presents Dr. Strangelove. And then on the first page of dialogue, we've got moving shot through black, starry, perpetual night of universe. The motion is straight ahead. Passing at various distances are stars, planets, asteroids, moons, aerolites, whatever aerolites are, and meteors. At great distances, we see fantastic whirls of light indicating a vast nebula. So we've got kind of the openings of 2001, but for Dr. Strangelove here. And then a narrator explains that they're looking deep back into history. They found some records deep in a mine shaft or something like that in the desert. So we've also got a little bit of AI. Yeah. And it ends, or well, it doesn't end, but this narration section on this page says, our story begins sometime during the latter half of the Earth's so-called 20th century. Simple nuclear weapons have been invented, but used only twice in the so-called Second World War. We deal with the period following this, which was chiefly marked by the fact that, though every nation feared surprise attack, the full consequences of nuclear weapons seemed to escape all governments and their people. So it's really nice, this kind of idea that there's aliens looking back at the story of this devastated planet, and this is what you would see at the opening of the film, this barren landscape, which is the Earth as it was.
Yes, Stanley always thought, I hope I haven't made a documentary, because as more and more weapons develop, and now we sort of, take it for granted. There's many more people have it, and we don't talk about it anymore so much. Like Californians don't talk about earthquakes.
There's the changes that took place to a film didn't just happen at the script stage. I want to get people asking questions in a moment, but before I do, perhaps you could talk about the famous alternative ending that had been shot. And I think we have some photos, including one of you, Christiane. Which was the pie fight ending version of the film.
Yes, there was a version of all of them starting to, and you see this big table full of food, and it was there in preparation to furnish this pie fight, and it was revolting. They had made lots of pies with shaving cream and whipped cream mixed, and it was indeed a unbelievable pie fight. It was very well done and very carefully done, and a huge pie fight success. And I think it was typical of Stanley to be very critical of himself. And he looked at it and he thought how brilliant the pie fight was, and it didn't match. It didn't match the tone of the rest of the film at all. It was sort of separate, and it took away from the ending, of the serious nature of the ending. It's really over. And the pie fight was a distraction and didn't match in style, and that's why he got rid of it. I think it was very disciplined of him to do so, because it was a lot of work.
I have to say, I think this is one of my favourite pieces from the archive.
You do look like a very unwilling participant.
Absolutely.
In that photo.
That's right. That's why it didn't match.